Have you ever felt like you're living in a movie? You step outside and suddenly a neighbor decides you're not fit to be part of their community. What could get you singled out? A pair of too nice workout clothes, playing music you enjoy at a reasonable volume, or simply not following the unspoken rules they've set for the neighborhood. My story began simply, but it quickly turned into a battle not just over a pool rule, but over power, manipulation, and fraud. I'm Dave Martinez, a man who recently lost the love of my life, and I decided to start fresh in a suburban community that seemed like the perfect place to heal. But little did I know, this neighborhood was one where power was abused and manipulation ran deep. One quiet summer afternoon, my nephew, Miguel, came to visit and invited a couple of his friends over for a swim. Just a few kids having fun, nothing extravagant. But within minutes, everything changed. Karen, the HOA vice president, appeared with a clipboard in hand, her sharp gaze cutting through the air, demanding I provide guest passes for Miguel's friends, something I had never even heard of. Just like that, a small misunderstanding turned into a huge confrontation. I realized this wasn't about pool rules anymore. This was about control, power, and something much deeper than a few kids playing in a pool. When Karen showed up that day, clipboard in hand, her attitude made it clear this wasn't just about enforcing rules. She wasn't interested in having a conversation or finding a compromise. No, Karen was interested in being in control. She looked at me with that condescending smile of hers, the kind that said, "I'm right and you're wrong," even though I hadn't broken any rules. And when I tried to explain that these weren't just random kids, they were family, Karen didn't care. To her, family meant nothing if it didn't fit within the neat little box of her rules. The more she spoke, the more I realized this wasn't about the pool. This wasn't about the guest passes. This was about making an example of me. She had chosen me as her target, and I had no idea why. It was almost as if my very presence in this neighborhood had disturbed her sense of order. She didn't know me. She didn't know my story, and she certainly didn't know what I'd been through. But she was quick to judge. That night, after Karen's official notice appeared on the community board, I sat in my living room staring at the letter she'd posted. Pool privileges suspended for Lot 47, pending compliance review. I couldn't believe it. I'd been living here for months, paid a premium for this house, and now some HOA bureaucrat was going to take away my rights for something as insignificant as a few extra guests? I wasn't the only one who felt this way. A few neighbors started texting me, expressing their sympathy. They saw the injustice in this, but no one wanted to say anything out loud. They were afraid of Karen, afraid of what she might do next. But I wasn't afraid. I'd spent 2 decades as a construction lawyer. I knew how to fight. I knew how to dig through the fine print and find the weaknesses. I knew when something didn't add up. And that's exactly what I did. I pulled out the HOA documents I had signed when I moved in, flipping through page after page, searching for something, anything, that would give me the leverage I needed to fight back. It didn't take long. Hidden on page 47 of the community charter, I found it, a clause about reasonable accommodation for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. This, I realized, was my golden ticket. Karen's guest policy directly violated this clause. And it wasn't just that. Her official letter scheduling the compliance hearing had violated at least 3 procedural requirements. First, the notice period was too short. 48 hours, when the bylaws clearly stated that 7 days' notice was required. Second, there was no specific mention of which bylaw had allegedly been violated. And third, the hearing had been scheduled during what any reasonable person would consider a family emergency, Sarah's birthday. With all this new information, I started preparing. I knew I had to make my case clear and irrefutable. I wasn't just fighting for my rights anymore. I was fighting for transparency and fairness for everyone in Willowbrook. If Karen could bully me, she could bully anyone. I couldn't let that happen.
The following Thursday, I walked into Karen's dining room with a manila folder of documents, pages highlighted and tabbed for easy reference. The smell of her lavender air freshener was so strong it almost made me dizzy, but I pushed through it. As I laid out the evidence, I could feel her growing discomfort. She tried to remain calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I wasn't intimidated by her anymore. This was my fight now. I started with the procedural violations, pointing them out one by one. The board members seemed a bit more uncomfortable as I laid out the facts. Karen's PowerPoint presentation about community standards and preserving property values seemed less convincing as I systematically tore it apart. I was doing something Karen was not prepared for. I was calling her out on her own game. She wasn't used to anyone questioning her authority. And then came the moment of truth. I pointed to the clause about family gatherings in the original charter and explained how Karen's actions had directly violated it. I watched as the room fell silent. The look on Karen's face was priceless. She knew she had lost. But instead of admitting it, she tried to deflect, making a personal attack. Maybe it was because I had lost Sarah. Maybe it was because of the grief I carried. But I was done letting people like Karen run the show. As I stood there, I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of corruption. Karen was going to learn that she couldn't just walk all over people. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. It was a war,
This
and I
inspection
was
and the
just
subsequent
getting started.
investigation into financial fraud began to unveil the truth about Karen. She wasn't just an HOA leader. She was a key player in a network of corruption. Everything I had suspected was coming to light. Now all I needed to do was expose the truth and ensure the community knew what was really going on. The following week, things started to escalate quickly. After Thursday's meeting, I noticed a noticeable shift in the atmosphere around me. Neighbors who had always kept quiet were now showing clear signs of anxiety and unease. The once peaceful community was now divided because of Karen's abuse of power. Those who supported Karen began acting like HOA enforcers, patrolling the neighborhood, documenting every minor infraction, even down to the smallest details that would have previously gone unnoticed. A few days later, I received certified mail from the HOA, an official notice from Karen about the ongoing investigation into me. She'd also called for an emergency meeting to remove me from the HOA. Honestly, I wasn't surprised anymore. She had done everything she could to ruin my reputation and force me into a corner. But I couldn't let that happen. I had already prepared myself. That night, I began to dig deeper into Karen's background and the truth about her financial connections. I carefully reviewed the public records concerning the HOA and the real estate transactions she had been involved in. Every piece of information I gathered made me feel more outraged. The invoices and receipts from the contractors didn't match the original budget projections. $700,000 had mysteriously vanished, and all the signs pointed to Karen. But Karen wasn't just an HOA leader. She was also a real estate agent and had been involved in the process of selling land for the community. Information about secret emails between Karen and the construction contractors began to reveal a massive fraud scheme that she was running. She had used her HOA position to profit through illegal commissions and kickbacks from the construction contracts. Each time the HOA signed a contract with a contractor, Karen would receive a large cash payment that no one ever scrutinized. Miguel, being tech-savvy, started recording Karen's social media posts. He found posts and comments that seemed harmless on the surface, but were actually full of hidden agendas. I could feel the tension building. The community was dividing more and more. The older residents were starting to worry about Karen's manipulation, while the newer residents, who had never experienced this kind of abuse, still supported her because they didn't fully understand the underlying issue. It felt like everything was unraveling. What I had once thought was a small issue was now becoming a full-blown battle. And Karen? She wasn't backing down. If anything, she was becoming even more vindictive, doing everything she could to cover up her actions.
The next day, I decided I couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. I had gathered enough evidence, and I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. I reached out to some former residents and people who had been targeted by Karen, asking them to share their stories about what Karen had done in the past. And then the stories started coming in. Stories of families who had been forced to move because they couldn't comply with Karen's ridiculous rules. Stories of how Karen used her power to make people comply with her demands, or else face harsh penalties. One of my neighbors, Jim, a man I'd never really talked to, started sharing information about Karen's secret talks with the contractors. He mentioned that he had overheard a conversation where Karen had asked for higher-than-allowed commissions to finalize the contracts. This made me realize that this wasn't just a personal power struggle, it was a fight over financial transparency. One evening, I received a visit from the police. They were there to investigate the violations Karen had accused me of, but I wasn't worried. I was ready. When the officers arrived, I handed them the recording of our conversation, where Karen had offered to settle things if I just dropped my complaints. And just as I had predicted, Karen walked right into her own trap. The police's inspection and the subsequent investigation into financial fraud began to unveil the truth about Karen. She wasn't just an HOA leader. She was a key player in a network of corruption. Everything I had suspected was coming to light. Now all I needed to do was expose the truth and ensure the community knew what was really going on. After everything that had been happening, I knew I couldn't just stand by anymore. This had gone far beyond a personal battle over a pool rule. This was about justice, about the truth being hidden, and about the abuse of power that I couldn't let Karen and her crew continue to manipulate. I had to take action. Right after gathering enough evidence, I decided to organize an emergency meeting with some of the other residents in the neighborhood who had also been wronged by Karen in the past. Some people in the community had stayed silent for too long, but now they were realizing that if they didn't speak up, nothing would ever change. Jim, a neighbor I'd never really spoken to much before, started sharing information about Karen's secret talks with the contractors. He mentioned that he had overheard a conversation where Karen had asked for higher-than-allowed commissions to finalize the contracts. This made me realize that this wasn't just a personal power struggle, it was a fight over financial transparency. Miguel, continuing to be the tech whiz he is, started recording Karen's harassment not just on social media, but in her direct confrontations with me. He even created a live stream every time Karen and her patrol team showed up, capturing the threats and violations of privacy happening in the neighborhood. Miguel's live videos quickly became a powerful weapon, not only exposing Karen's actions, but also sparking a strong backlash from the community. I could feel the support growing. The residents who had once been afraid were now finding their voices. We weren't alone in this fight anymore. But Karen wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to go down without a fight. Instead, she began intensifying her attacks. She found ways to delay the investigation, filed more complaints with local authorities and the police, and pushed even harder to discredit me in the community. She even submitted fake letters to local authorities accusing me of threats and harassment. But this time, I was ready. I had already prepared myself. One afternoon, I received a call from Detective Chen. She informed me that after reviewing all the evidence I had provided, the police and authorities had found enough evidence to proceed with charges against Karen for financial fraud and corruption within the HOA. The sense of relief was undescribable. It felt like a huge victory, knowing that everything I had worked for, every conversation, every document, every hour spent digging into this mess was finally coming to fruition. Karen, the one I thought was untouchable, was now facing the consequences of her actions. But I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't just going to sit by and take it. I understood she would do everything in her power to impede the investigation, even if it meant resorting to more extreme measures. But this time, I wasn't alone. The community had awakened, and we were ready to fight for what is right together. As soon as I got the official word from the police, I decided not to wait for the authorities to take the next step. I had to actively inform the community. I organized a public meeting with all the residents where I shared every piece of evidence I had collected against Karen. This meeting was a game changer. It mobilized the community. People who had been quiet and fearful before were now speaking up, and Karen couldn't hide from the truth. When I saw the residents standing up to Karen, I didn't just feel proud of what I had done, but I also felt something much deeper. We, ordinary people, could change an entire system when we stood together. This neighborhood wasn't just where I lived anymore. It had become a place where everyone understood the power of transparency, truth, and justice. My story is not just a personal battle. It's a lesson about the power of unity and transparency. We all face big challenges, but when we stand up for what is right and fight for our rights, we have the power to change an entire system. Karen believed she could manipulate this community, using her power to enforce illegal rules and manipulate finances. But in the end, it was the silence of the community that became the strongest weapon. This community refused to accept injustice, and they spoke up. That's why unity and conscious action from each individual in the community helped us reclaim justice. The lesson here is never be afraid to speak out when you know you're fighting for what is right. Transparency is the most important tool to protect your rights and assets. Also remember, no matter how much power someone might hold, when you have enough evidence, determination, and community support, victory is always within reach. This story is meant to inspire you, not just in life, but in every decision you make. Justice will always prevail, and if we stand together to fight for it, nothing is impossible. If you found this story inspiring, don't just stop here. Like this video and show your support for standing up against injustice. If you've ever experienced something similar, or if this made you think about the importance of transparency and community, drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear your stories and insights. And hey, if you believe in the power of truth and the strength of a united community, make sure you share this video with your friends. It could help someone in need of inspiration. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where we fight for what is right together. Let's keep the momentum going.